obvious fingernail marks on this baby's face. Now, when you look at these photos, folks, take a look at Bradley's hands. Take a look at his fingernails, or lack thereof. You can see it. His fingernails are cut 1/4 inch below the top of his finger. But did they swab the end of his fingers and his hands? Yes, they did. They sure did. Was there any evidence found that would correspond to the marks on Kinsley's face? No, there wasn't. Why did they not swab Rebecca Kinner's hands, her fingernails? Why wouldn't they do that? Because they had already decided Bradley Young was the perpetrator of this. They decided within 1 hour. You heard the video where the detective told Brad he was already found guilty by the jury. He had already figured the crime out, I guess did a trial in his mind, sat as the jury, and found him guilty. That's all. That's all. That's not good piece of work. That's just awful. Now, they were stuck with what they had at that point. They were committed. So now, let's look at the evidence. It starts with the doctors and what went on at the hospital. And there were a couple of interesting things. And first of all, the doctors, bless them, they're great. Most of them don't have a dog in this fight. Now, there was one doctor in particular, she was very honest with you folks. She said she's an advocate for abuse victims. She's all about it. She takes the stand with one thing in mind: convict who's ever sitting next to the Chabons. That's who she's going to convict. That's what your job would be, according to her. I respect the fact that she is so passionate about what she does. She saves lives. She comes in court, tries to do her best. But when you look at Dr. Newman, when you look at Dr. Correa, these folks were not here as advocates. They were here as doctors. So Dr. Simonson talked about the meeting that they had on December the 8th, the Tuesday following December 2nd, the Wednesday. And at that meeting were all the professionals involved in the case. There were police, there were doctors, there were social workers, approximately 30 people. But the interesting thing is, and Dr. Simonson was very honest, when she was asked about notes from that meeting to refresh her recollection, we don't take notes. We just want to make sure everyone is on the same page. Why? Why don't they take notes? She told you why. So they couldn't be subpoenaed. Well, why are doctors that are trying to figure out why a child died worried about having their notes subpoenaed? Let the lawyers worry about that. Let the judge worry about that. Let the jury worry about that. They're in a hospital. But she wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page. Now, I am not going to try to guess what was going on at that meeting, but I would think since the police were there, they gave their view. Well, we've got a mother. She's saying all these things. We've got a gentleman who's denying it. The doctors say, well, what is she saying? The police tells them. Oh, well, that could fit here, and that could fit there. You know, the child's got a lot of marks and bruises on him. Well, you know now where those marks and bruises came from because the defense brought the witness in. Kinsley's great-grandmother. And she explained it to you. She didn't want to. And I can understand that. But she told you, and you heard her statement when she told you that Kinsley was really rough on herself. And that matched what Chuck Giesbach was saying. That Mike Rudy was saying. That the child was rough. The child had a lot of marks. That was Chuck Giesbach. But the point here is, this child was covered with marks and bruises and that kind of thing. Not from Bradley Young. That's the implication. That's the inference that the state wants you to draw. That this man just literally beat this child every chance he had. Which wasn't really very often. You're going to have the work records of Bradley Young in the jury room. You're going to have a calendar. The calendar you're going to have clearly shows when Bradley was in town and when he was not. And that calendar is set up in such a fashion that the diagonals are work days, and when the days are circled, Bradley is at home. And if you count these, you'll find that this relationship, if that's what it's to be like, is 93 days long. And of those 93 days, Rebecca Kinner, Kinsley, and Bradley were together 29 days. No more than 4 or 5 days at a time. Now, when the mother of this child, if the mother of this child, felt that Bradley Young was in some way a danger, first of all, stay home with grandma and grandpa. Stay home. Keep the child at home. Or if you want to be a little bit wild and crazy, you go, Rebecca, and let the baby stay at home. Let the baby stay at home with grandma. And then go party. It's only a couple of days a month. So then go be with the single guy. Do what you got to do. If you're that concerned, leave your baby at home. But she wasn't. Shopping, together watching movies, eating, doing all the things that normal people do. So, how afraid could she have been? How concerned could she have been? Now, I do not know what kind of mother Rebecca Kinner was. But in looking at the photographs of this child, the care that this child got was deplorable. You're going to have a picture of Kinsley's hands. And you heard the testimony of the doctor. Under each one of her fingernails was dirt. Dirt. The bottoms of her feet are deplorable. They're absolutely deplorable. What kind of mother puts her child, if the state's argument is to be believed, what kind of a mother puts her child in that situation? Not only the way she was being cared for, but if this man is so dangerous, why do you have your baby around him? It makes no sense. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what the state of Ohio produced to you in this case. And they haven't done it. Ladies and gentlemen, there was talk about the child's hands being smacked. Brad, I believe, stated in his statement that he had done that. But in the jury room, take a look at the hands of this baby. There's not a bruise, not a mark, nothing that would be consistent with someone continually beating on the hands of a 2-year-old. Can you imagine how much damage a man would do to a baby? Beating its hands, spanking on a bare butt of a child, it would be awful. There would be handprints, there would be welts, there would be damage to this child. Ladies and gentlemen, the story that the authorities would have you believe just doesn't match up with what we see. The child didn't have any lacerations on his body except for the fingernail marks. That was it. There was no blood on his baby, except for the epithelium, which, by the way, just happens to be at the same height as the blood stain on Bradley Young's sweatpants. It's right here. So she hugged him. That's the transfer of blood. He was giving her CPR. He had constant contact with Kinsley. But I found it so compelling that that's where the blood was. It makes so much sense. So the only source of that blood would have been the child's lip, because the child wasn't cut anywhere. Rebecca Kinner texted on the way to the county lockup to where the investigation is going to take place. There's lots of talk about texts in this case. Think about your own telephone, folks. Think about explaining every text in your telephone. There's some stuff on there you don't want to have put in the middle of the courtroom. You don't want to have it on the screen. Well, Rebecca, when asked at the scene, where were you? She said, we were in the bedroom. Well, that's true, but they weren't in the bedroom when this second event with Kinsley. Bradley always told them, we were on the couch. When the second event happened, when 911 was called, they were on the couch. Could it be that the text was reminding her, hey, we weren't in the bedroom, we were on the couch. We left the bedroom, came out to the couch. Because, yeah, if things started getting strange, I mean, this man is a veteran. The prosecutor told you that. He's been around. He's been around the world. He understands what goes on. And yeah, it was pretty obvious when they were put into a police car, not allowed to go to the hospital. Oh boy, there's trouble here. There's trouble here. And you know, something else. The police told Brad Young, that baby's going to be fine. That baby's going to be fine. There's nothing wrong with that baby. As a matter of fact, if you don't come clean, that baby's going to come into the courtroom and they're going to walk that baby around the courtroom and you're going to get convicted. So really, the only thing that was on Bradley's mind was, damn, I don't have a driver's license. My driver's license was suspended. The police jumped on that car crash. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no evidence that contradicts Bradley Young's statement regarding the crash of that car on Saturday. Here's his statement. He admitted almost immediately, whoa, I lied about that. As a matter of fact, strike that, please. So the state wanted to run with the ball. And they showed you a picture on the screen. Officer, do you see any damage on that front bumper? Oh, no. There's no damage on that front bumper consistent with any type of crash or fender bender. Do you see any kind of damage on that front bumper? Oh, no, Madam Prosecutor, I don't. Well, folks, you're going to have defendants exhibit I in the jury room with a driver's license. Now, I'm disappointed in the state of Ohio because why would they use that picture? Why wouldn't they use that picture? Well, that's an easy one. Because this picture is evidence that that car crash did occur. Ladies and gentlemen, are we saying that that car crash in any way contributed to the death of Kinsley Kinner? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But why the game? You heard me ask the detective if this was some kind of a game. And he didn't really have an answer. He didn't really have an answer. But if you're going to put evidence before a jury, put the real deal out there. Because you know where I got this picture, ladies and gentlemen? From the state of Ohio. They had this picture. But they chose to show you one from a different angle that didn't show the damage. Just in a court of law. Search for the truth. A search for justice. Justice doesn't just go one way. It doesn't go just one way. When Mr. Moser stood in front of you and he said, 1, 2, 3, 4, all I could think about was close the prison door. It's that easy. Just find him guilty for one whole, be done with all this. But what he forgot about was proof. Proof. They take a couple little tidbits, and then they want you to start inferring from those tidbits. Oh, he said in the text, smack her in the mouth. He's a tough guy, you know, and who knows what conversations they had together, Rebecca and Brad, about the child. You know she was having a problem with the child because she said, I busted her on her bare ass and she spit in my face. And there's a text right there. This was the conversation that was going on between them. And Brad said, you know, just smack her in the mouth. Well, maybe not something you would do. But talking about people that are 26 years old, 23 years old, never dreaming that that bone was going to be opened up and looked at by the world. Yeah, Brad said it. Go ahead and smack her in the mouth. Because you know what? He's probably getting tired of it. He's probably getting tired of it. You know, this relationship, if you want to call it that, was really flimsy. There were no commitments here. There was nothing. And really, Brad gave these two a place to hang out. You know, are there any cards from Brad saying, oh, I love you? You know, is there a ring? No. You know, it's a passing thing. And I'm sure the relationship was way more important to Rebecca Kinner than it was to Bradley Young. The things that were important to Bradley Young was, the thing was his job. That's what he cared about. That's what he cared about. I mean, the man's working 12 days out of town, 4 days home. Pretty tough. You're going to have his work records. Take a look at his work records. Just take a moment, go through them, take a look at his schedule, take a look at how much money he made, take a look at all of it. But, you know, the last page is really interesting. You want to take a look at it. It's a drug screen. For whatever use you want to make of it. And it's dated July 15, 2015. It's in there. Take a look at it. Take a look at every page. The witnesses. Dr. Correa was the first witness. She was the radiologist that came in and testified as to the progression of this film. Ladies and gentlemen, something bad happened to Kinsley. Something bad happened to Kinsley's head. doctors do not agree as to exactly when it happened. Dr. Lumen, minutes. Dr. Correa, hours. Does that prove beyond a reasonable doubt of that issue? I say not. Judge is going to instruct you that proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof that you would rely on in the most important of your own affairs. The most important of your own affairs. Not like where we're going to have lunch. It's more like, do I do that bypass surgery? Or do I wait? When I'm a diabetic and I might die on the table, you might want to get a second opinion. That's the kind of evidence that you need to convict a person of murder. Remember, folks, this isn't a driving under the influence case. This is a murder case. And when you look at this chart, I know Mr. Moser at least paid enough respect to it to hold it, and I appreciated that. But he kind of just glossed over it. You know, when you start at the top of this chart, you see, proven not guilty. Well, then the person's not guilty. Keep in mind, and as we know in this country, the burden is on the state of Ohio to prove everything. In this case, the defendant, Bradley Young, did not have to prove one thing. Now, that's not some type of a dodge. It's the law. It's the law that we want. Because we are presumed innocent, are we not? Or is it we're presumed innocent unless it's the death of a baby case? And then you're presumed guilty. And then your lawyer better prove you're innocent. That's not the way it works. And that's not the way you want it to work. That's scary if you think about that. The power of the state of Ohio coming down on you is insurmountable. It is terrible. But if you look at this, it really does make sense. When you get to right down here, this area, this is where it starts to get pretty heavy. If you think perhaps Bradley Young killed that baby, perhaps he did. Your answer by law has to be not guilty. And if you think that you suspect it, that's not guilty. Even if you think he's possibly guilty, probably guilty, if you think guilt is highly likely, your verdict has to be not guilty. Highly likely. You can sit right there in that jury box and say it's highly likely it's going to rain. And still not beyond a reasonable doubt. So what evidence do you have to overcome that presumption of innocence, which is what we have, and we guard, and that's what we respect in a court of law? We have Dr. Correa. No fractures. Couldn't really, none of the doctors could explain which of those marks on the child caused the brain to swell. They couldn't do that. But they did say shaking or a fall from a high spot, high place, I believe the doctor said 5 stories, or a severe car accident. Well, this is not a multiple choice test. Did they prove that issue? No, they did not. Did they prove the time that this happened? No, they did not. We've got hours, 2 minutes. Well, again, does that help? That falls in the may not be area, which is only halfway. Dr. Rutz, the eye doctor, the ophthalmologist. Retinal hemorrhaging. Oh, a sign of abuse. But she also said blood issues were responsible, could be responsible for the retinal hemorrhaging. Well, this child had blood issues. This child had impetigo. The doctor told you. That's staph. It's staph infection in the blood. It's a bloodstream infection. So the child did have blood issues. But that doesn't fit with abuse. So the doctor made sure she stayed away from that. If you recall, she testified under oath to the jury, it 1 in a million. And, you know, I had to challenge her on that because 1 in a billion? Come on. Is that just a phrase that we use on the street? Or is that a phrase that's used by doctors in a courtroom? Well, then she finally went to very rare. Fine. But don't say 1 in a million. Don't degrade the system that we're living in, that we've been spending a week in. Don't degrade it by saying 1 in a billion. But she's a great eye doctor. But she didn't know who did it. She couldn't point the finger at the person who did this. Dr. Simonton, already talked about Dr. Simonton. No blood, no fractures. Talked about the type of injuries that the child had on her body, and none of those were really consistent with a beating, beyond a reasonable doubt. A man beating a baby. A mechanic beating a baby, a man in his mid-20s beating a baby. Can you imagine? In a rage, what that baby would look like. It'd be awful. Eyes swollen, blood coming out of its nose, teeth that are cracked, lips that are cut from being smashed up against the baby's mouth. Take a look at the pictures, folks. There's not one mark on that baby's lips other than the impetigo. There's no sign that that child was slapped in the mouth at all by anybody. There's just no evidence of that. Dr. Simonton talked about Munchausen syndrome, and she testified to you that Munchausen syndrome, by proxy, is a condition where people will cause injury or disease in another human in order to gain sympathy for themselves. Now, did we prove that Rebecca Kinner had Munchausen syndrome, that condition, and because of that she killed Kinsley Kinner? No, we did not prove that. Did we need to? No, we did not. Not our job. But, isn't it strange? We've got a baby that looks relatively fine on the outside. A couple bruises, some scratches. Exactly what Grandma Nina Kinner testified to. The child would run into walls and bang her head on tables and just do a lot of wild things to herself. And those leave marks. But, you know, she didn't fall off that chair right on her head. Whether it was 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, I'm not sure from the testimony how many times the child fell off the chair, hit her head on a faucet, whether or not she hit her head while Rebecca Kinner was bathing the child. But the child was beat up pretty well just by the fact that she did what she did. Now, no doctor said that falling off the chair was going to cause this kind of injury. But, ladies and gentlemen, you got to wonder, how many times can you jostle that brain before it finally goes, ta-da? And then the process of swelling begins. And the doctor was very careful to point out that it wasn't the hemorrhaging, it wasn't the hematoma, it was the swelling of the brain. Because what happens is, as you heard, the brain runs out of room. And it can only go one place, and that's down the spinal column. Right out the bottom of the skull, down the brainstem, into the spinal column. And then that cuts off the breathing, and then that creates a heart attack. That was the progression of death. So it began with a swollen brain. So, you know, beyond reasonable doubt, that fall off of Grandma Kinner's chair caused this. Now, I feel really bad. I think everyone does. She's not on trial here. But for whatever reason, just didn't want to think that something that might have happened in her house would have caused this to happen. Great. And I certainly understand. But she told the police the truth on the morning of December 2nd in Children's Hospital. She wrote it all down. And she did say she fell off a chair at my house and hit her head hard. And she did say, Kinsley is a very active child. And when she doesn't get her way, she gets so upset that she either bangs the back of her head or the front of her face and forehead. Either the day before Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving. Kinsley climbed up in her chair next to me and fell very hard in her face and forehead, causing bruises to her face and forehead. So there's no mystery here. And that's a witness that, ladies and gentlemen, I believe the state should have produced for you. If they're truly searching for justice, and they really do want the truth, then bring it. Let Mrs. Kinner testify as to what her child or her great-grandchild experienced. That should not be up to the defense. The state didn't even bother to open the box of clothes. So you can see the clothes that Bradley had on. Why didn't they do that? I don't know. But we wanted to see where the bloodstain was. Right there. Right where that little girl's head was when she saw Brad and presumably hugged him. Doctors go on. Dr. Krebs from Atrium Hospital. Fracture of the C2. Baby did not have a fracture of the C2. They must have been busy. He was moving along. He was worried about saving that baby's life. And unfortunately, he misread the x-ray and missed it. Saw something that may have looked like a fracture, but it certainly wasn't. Of course, he did not know who did it. He does not know who created the situation where that child had a brain swell. Dr. Lubin, the coroner, outstanding doctor. Outstanding. She found old and new bruises and bleeding, which is consistent with Mrs. Kinner's testimony about the child falling, about the child having a history of banging her head against the wall and the floor. She said the swelling began within minutes. Dr. Correa, hours. Bonnie Short from the Sheriff's Department. Oh, but excuse me, Dr. Lumen did not testify as to who did this to this child. Bonnie Short came in, played the 911 tape. The 911 tape was incredible. I think the single most important piece of evidence in this case is the 911 call. Because what did you hear? You heard Rebecca Kinner talking to the dispatcher, the 911 operator. My baby woke up not breathing. Oh, okay. Well, settle down. What was there to settle down? Okay, now, are you there alone? Does someone know how to do CPR? And it went on. But listen to the tape. Now, in opening statement, Mr. Moser told you there are voices in the background of the 911 tape. There certainly is. It's Bradley Young's voice. And what's he saying? Come on, sis. Come on, sis. And he's counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 30. 6 times. 180 counts and never missed one. And in between, trying to blow life into that baby. Finally, silent. Mom left the phone next to Brad. Officer said he ran into her out in the driveway. Where was the concern? Where was the terror? That her child wasn't breathing. It was actually dying in the kitchen. She was outside. She couldn't bear to see it. Can you imagine? Why couldn't she bear to see it? Deputy Turner testified. Chuck was in the kitchen. Brad was doing CPR. Becca was outside. He jumped into the CPR, asked no questions. He put in his report that he thought that the child had fallen out of a high chair. I think that's pretty much been squared away. Made a mistake. He had a lot going on. He had a lot. It was the first time he'd ever had to do that. It's the first time Brad Young ever had to do that. So maybe his hands were a little bit out of shape. Yeah, he was trained medic in the Army. He was a trained medic. But not trained to take care of a baby in your house who all of a sudden is not breathing. He was scared. It all went away. And listen to the tape. Because he's going, tell me what to do. And then the 911 operator, it seemed like forever before she finally got to it. And he said it, tell me what to do. And she did. And they did. Sergeant Cheney. The female officer from Trenton came on the scene. She has no evidence as to the commission of the crime. That's not why she was here. But she testified as to the fact that Rebecca Kinner told her that Brad did nothing for the child. Never said that she was in danger. They were interviewed separately. Wouldn't that have been the time for Rebecca to say, oh my God, my baby has been beaten by that monster. And I'm so afraid of him that I cannot even talk. Please, officer, protect me from him. Because at that point, she was safe. She was safe. There were cops everywhere. All she had to do is just sit in that cruiser and just tell it. My baby was whatever. Shake it. Because the baby doesn't look beaten. Just think about it. Look at those pictures. Baby doesn't look like it was punchy. But what Sergeant Cheney could not do is testify as to who did this. Who did this to this baby? Deputy Romans, statements running around back and forth at the scene. Brad was on the couch with mom and child. Rebecca said they were in the bedroom. Oh, that's true. They were. They were all in the bedroom. They were all on the couch. But what the deputy could not testify to was who did it. And if you recall, in cross-examination, his report did not match his testimony. And he remembered on the stand some things that were not in his report. Detective Barger, he did some evidence work, but again, did not testify who did this. Detective Steele took photos, took the car photos. Photos showed no crash. He didn't identify anybody that would have caused this child any harm. Detective Bentry took photos of Brad's hands, but did not take photos of Rebecca's hands. Now, I've already discussed with you the importance of that, but Detective Bentry did what I like to call gild the lily. Went a little too far, because it's a big case, folks, and, you know, I guess it's human nature. People want to solve the case, get a piece of it. Now, Detective Bentry said that he noticed bruising on the right hand of Bradley Young. Same hand with the dog bite. Scratch, whatever that is. Now, They're in the county jail. Wouldn't it have been a great thing to pick up the phone and call the medics in the jail and say, hey, would you come down to investigation room number 1, please? I'd like for you to take a look at this guy's hands. A medical person. Have the jail doctor do it. Even better. In their words, this is a murder case. Well, then let's start acting like it. We don't need the photographer in the police department to determine whether or not this man's hands are swollen and red when it comes to reasonable doubt, and when it comes to presumption of innocence, when it comes to evidence to overcome that presumption. Photo tech is not going to take the stand and tell you folks that hand is swollen. That should not satisfy you. Because if you look at it, you're going to determine whether it's swollen or not. You know, if you put your hand down flat and press on it like you were told to do, see what happens when you do that. See what happens. But what Ventry could not testify to was who did this. Who did this? Detective Sprague collected evidence, drew a diagram.
May we approach?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, as I indicated the first day, you are not to conduct any tests, experiments. You're to decide this case based upon the evidence that's presented. So the court sustained the objection. The objection had to do with the suggestion you should go back in the jury room and place your hands on the table. You are instructed that you are not permitted to conduct any tests or experiments. Decide this case just on the evidence that's presented. Understood? All right. Mr. Schiavone, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Kinsley Kinner testified and really she testified about the relationship between mother and daughter. She's the lady that demonstrated how Rebecca punished his mother. Bradley's statement was played, and it's all in the eye of the beholder, folks. Put yourself in that situation. Would you be scared? Would you be terrified? Bradley was. You can tell. Did he cooperate? Absolutely. Did you see him even hesitate at the end of 4 or 5 hours of interrogation when they said, would you sign a consent so we can take your DNA? Oh, yeah, no problem. Put his hand right out there, opened his mouth, did the whole deal. He didn't say, well, you have a search warrant. I want a lawyer, blah, blah, no. What he said was, sure, sign the consent. Now, his lie was the accident witness who was driving that car. Not whether there was a crash or not, but whether or not he was driving the car. And as I stated to you in opening statement, he went from worrying about a ticket for driving under suspension to sitting in the courtroom charged with murder. He wasn't worried about Kinsley Kinner's injuries because he didn't inflict them. All of a sudden, the light was on him. And he was beginning to fight for his life right then. No, he didn't really care about Rebecca Kinner at that point. When she walked in that room, the police had already told Bradley that she was going, man. She was talking. She was talking. Well, Yeah, yeah, upsetting. But then upsetting to the point where you start yelling at her? And if you accept the state's contention that this is a violent, controlling man, well, was he violent and controlling? Come here, babe, sit next to me. That's controlling. Can you imagine what would have happened if he'd have stood up and walked around that table to her? How quickly the 6'4" detective would have been all over him? And they would have called it an attack. So they're trying to come out of it just fine either way, but it didn't happen the way they wanted it to happen because she did not go in that room and she did not look at him and call him a murderer. Instead, she sat down, she smoked a cigarette, sat next to him, and you heard what she said. To the point where finally the detective walked in and said, "Let's go. Let's go." Wasn't working out. So they can't have it both ways. They can't have it where he's a controlling manipulator and also that he's real passive about Kinsley's injuries and about the bond. Just remember, he was told she's going to be all right. She's going to be all right. Detective Steiner did the extraction reports. Now, the extraction reports, it all sounded real boring up there. Taking all the information off the phones and that kind of thing. And you're going to have Defendant's Exhibit U with you in the jury. And I ask you to please take a look at U because there's some interesting entries in U. Again, and you heard the gentleman explain, everything can come off your telephone pretty much. Where you go on the internet, what call you make, what text you make, that can all come out of your phone. And what you'll find on line 259 of page 2 of this report is just interesting what people do. On November the 18th, Rebecca Kinner looked up quotes about feeling useless. And there's a whole bunch of other ones also. But I found that one particularly interesting. She also looked up Springboro teen's death under investigation. That was on the 24th of November. And then on the 30th of November, 3 dead and 7 critical in a multi-car crash in Middletown. Now, on the day that they went to Kinsley's great-grandmother's house, on December the 2nd, on December the 1st, when they returned home, you heard Chuck testify that Brad went into the garage for a while, 20 minutes or so. And then it was around 10 o'clock, quarter after 10, something like that. But it's interesting because at virtually the same time Brad was in the garage, Rebecca looked up an article about infant twins dying at the same time in Indiana apartment. And then 2 minutes later, community rallying behind a 5-year-old battling terminal cancer. And then there was a break until 2:45 in the morning. She looked up toddler sleep problems, crying, snoring, and sleep schedules. And then at 2:50, 10 minutes till 3, 2-year-old screaming in sleep at night, Google search. And then at 2:50, 25 seconds, why is my toddler suddenly waking up hysterical at night? And then at 4:53 a.m., 1 hour before she called 911, she brought up the website for her credit union. I have no idea why, but it's interesting what people do, especially when their child is dying. Now, Rebecca made some calls. At virtually the same time she was bringing it up on the website, she called her credit union at 4:54 a.m. Called 911 at 5:54. And then there were a series of calls to her grandmother and her father, and that all stopped at about 6:59 when they took her photograph. Now, again, does it prove that Rebecca Kinner killed her daughter? No. Is that what we need to do? No. What the state of Ohio has proven, one more witness, the DNA scientist, Mary Cisco. No DNA or blood on his hands, shirt, or hood. On Brad's hands, shirt, or hood. Why is that important? That's important for a lot of reasons. I won't leave it at that. There was blood on the sweatpants, not consistent with the injuries that this child suffered. Because this child wasn't bleeding from anywhere except her little lip. The state proved to you that this all occurred in Butler County, state of Ohio. They proved to you that this is the proper court. They proved to you that the child is passed and deceased. They proved to you who the child was. They proved to you that there were 3 persons present in that place. Rebecca Kinner, Bradley Young, and Chuck Usbach. They proved that. They proved that there were non-life-threatening bruises on this child. What they did not prove was the identification of Bradley Young as the person that did this. Folks, that is absolutely the most important thing that needs to be remembered in this case. And I've been doing it all along as I talked to about the witnesses. No one has taken the stand and pointed the finger at Brad Young and said, this is the man that punched that baby in the head or shook that baby to death. Not one bit of evidence. The state is asking you to say 1, 2, 3, 4, slam the prison door on Brad Young because we've got a dead baby. Certainly, the mother didn't do it. Well, folks, I want you to consider something. If Brad is in the garage, Brad's in the garage, Mrs. Kinner's in the house, Rebecca is. She's got the baby in the house, and this is the pack and play. And I can only assume that's in the same condition as it was in when the police entered that house and took it. But it appears to be broken. Or I just don't know how to make it work. But it appears to be broken. Now, obviously, it may not be obvious to you, but it seems to be obvious that this lady was on the internet messing around looking at a lot of things. Kinsley was having problems with sleep patterns, with hysteria, with a lot of stuff that I don't believe Rebecca Kinner could handle. And all the evidence in this case, I believe, would point the finger directly at Rebecca Kinner. That child was not beaten by me. I don't believe Rebecca Kinner, other than grabbing the child's face and leaving those fingernail marks, did not punch the child. I don't believe she did. But what I believe she did was she had enough. And I'm not sure that along the way she didn't shake Kinsley Kinsley, stop it. It worked. Now maybe sometimes Kinsley would spit in her face, maybe she'd get another shake. Kinsley! And it worked. Kinsley would stop praying. But on this particular night, got a little crazy, got a little bit out of control. She was in the house alone, and she pretty much had enough. And that baby started crying again, and she tried her shake method. Kinsley, stop it! Kinsley! 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 That's what caused her head injury. That's why it's all internal. That's why there's not a cut on that child's head. That's why there's not punch marks from a man hitting that child. That's just as likely with the evidence that you have before you as to how that child died. Because folks, there are two types of mothers. There are mothers that will kill their children. There are mothers that will kill anyone that is trying to kill their child. And there's nothing in between. There is nothing in between. Folks, you're a jury that has been selected in this case. You have the privilege of being in courtrooms in the United States of America. I love the courtroom. I respect the courtroom. The courtroom is a place for truth and for justice. Excuse me. You are not a mob. You are not a lynch mob. You are not an arm of social media. You are a jury. And it's up to you to separate the wheat from the chaff. It's up to you to maintain the Constitution of the United States. It's up to you to maintain the presumption of innocence. It's up to you to make sure the state of Ohio proves its case beyond a reasonable doubt. Not, it's highly likely, that's not going to get it. Ladies and gentlemen, the state of Ohio is asking you to hang a sign around Bradley Young's neck that says murderer. Child murderer. With this type of evidence, ladies and gentlemen, if your son was sitting next to my son and myself,
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Rephrased.
Would you feel satisfied, ladies and gentlemen, with this type of evidence to convict anyone of murder? I say no. And I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, please deliberate. Look at this evidence. Demand that the presumption of innocence is gone. Do not allow the presumption of guilt to climb into this case. Demand that the state of Ohio has proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt before you hang the sign around that man's neck. And I certainly thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cervoni. We've been here about an hour, ladies and gentlemen. Take a 10-minute break. During the course of our recess, remember to abide by the admonitions that I shared with you. Please make room and an opportunity for the jury to exit the closing. Have a seat. Jury has vacated the courtroom. Is there anything we need to discuss during the course of our break, counsel?
No, Your Honor, not by the state. Thank you.
Nothing on behalf of the defense, Judge. Thank you.
Enjoy your break.
10 minutes, thank you, Judge.
10 minutes.
Please rise. Court's in recess. Ladies and gentlemen, when you go out the hallway, I remind you, stay away from the jurors.